Well, hi there students, it's Mr. Verzette. Today we're going to talk a little bit about artistic style. Now I'm going to narrow this down a little bit into more of the entertainment, comic, cartoony type style range. Mainly because the age group that I teach, this typically appeals, and also I'm biased. It's one of my favorite methods. But let's get started. So right here you have what's called an objectivity spectrum, meaning something that's very objective is really realistic looking. Something that is non-objective is very abstract looking. And what does that mean? Well, let's take a quick look. Over here on the right, we have very objective looking art. And over here on the left, we have very non-objective looking art. So if we start with realism on the right, you've got photorealism. And then move a little further to the left, we start getting into the non-realistic, yet anatomically correct, objective illustrations. So for example, comic books in American style comics would look like this. And if we get into what's called idealism on the spectrum, that is when you're pursuing an ideal or a type of range of emotion in your art. And this would be a way that you stylize your work in a way that doesn't really happen realistically, but it still is a fun little exploration. So for example, like the values and shadows are using colors that aren't realistic, though the figures still look like it. And then if we continue down to the idealistic side, we might fall into various types of anime or manga where we've got really super deformed features, though it still is grounded in solid rules. Okay? And then we get into abstraction. This is what you would call abstract art. Abstract art still is identifiable as something that you can tell what it is, but it can't exist in the real world. So we wouldn't be able to have people that look like this because gravity would make them fall over, all right? It's more about like the symbolism and the dance that's going on between line and shape, but we can still tell what we're looking at, right? If we go into further down the spectrum, we still have further abstractions where rules start to get even more thrown out. So here we can still tell this is a figure, but the choice of value, choice of color and features, that's not the focus, right? It's more about the expression and the message that the artist is not necessarily trying to convey, but to have you convey through their work. And then we get into expressive art, the fullest form of non-objectivity, and that is where there are no rules. There are no identifiable forms in here. It's just straight up texture and value and color, okay? So again, as I said earlier, it's less about what is it trying to say, but rather what is it making you say when you look at this. Each of these is equally valid. Each of these has a tremendous depth of joy put into them by the artist and purpose and meaning. And each of them has certain traits that if you were to study what those traits are, you could adopt that stance in your artwork. Now, going from that perspective, here are different styles of using the figure. In our Design Fundamentals class, we're learning the figure. We've learned figure drawing, gesture drawing, we've learned the different features of the face, and now we're applying it in design. How do we now speak with these skills? So this is your traditional manga style. Here is American comic book style, and here's kind of an architectural concept art style here. Style is not what your art says. Style is how it speaks, or the type of voice that it has, right? Each of these has a totally different voice. This one down here is fun and whimsical, even though the situation is action-packed and energetic. This one up here is pretty scary looking. This one down here is very serious and epic. Studying from life is one of the best ways to develop a style, especially your own style. It wasn't until I was shown all the different pieces of the eyes or the nose and the mouth that I could then adapt those individual pieces to that style more effectively, and then eventually go and grow and develop my own style from there. So what studying life does is it teaches you how to see. You may not be mindful of all the different parts of the eye right here until they're pointed out to you. After learning that, then you have more that you can manipulate. If you're adopting a specific style of anime, for example, you would know that certain parts of the eye aren't necessary in order to convey I-ness. If you were to dilute that down even further, what else could you sacrifice while still retaining a female-like eye shape here? So this is an exercise that I do with my students. We simplify things down into their basic essence, similar to gesture drawing. So here's a picture of a student who is drawing, but we want to translate him into a different style and stretch our understanding of how things work. So he represents all that we can say, all right? And if we break it down to its basic angles and proportions and relationships, that's all that we want to say, all right? Now we've got to figure out how to say it. And so that's where we stylize. We would look at cartooning and notice that cartooning, for example, exaggerates some things and leaves other things alone, minimizes them. If we hadn't minimized, we wouldn't know what to exaggerate, you see? So what I'm exaggerating is the act that he was doing and some of the prominent facial features that he had. For example, the big bushy hairdo. That takes just basic information and translates it into a voice. So what am I looking at? Well, I'm looking at personality traits, anatomy, actions, and poses. Body language is very important. And then you apply specific conventions to it. So for example, if we were going to go to manga, I would exaggerate the eyes, de-emphasize the nose, have a solid mass for the hair, okay? Or if we're doing generic cartooning, then we'd use various contour line effects. You as a student can apply it like this. Take a photograph or a realistic drawing that you've done and then bump it down a notch, right? Just from observation. Now if we take a look at this, these look, it looks like the same plant. It's a lily, right? Well, if we go over the top, they're totally different. Like the leaves aren't even the same size, it's missing several folds, but it still communicates lily-ness. We can still tell that this is this, right? It's just simplified. There's not as much information carried over in the overall structure. So here's an exercise that I have the students do. Get a mirror and make a silly face. In this image, my students had me make kind of a serial killer type look, right? Looking down at the mirror and really freaking out. Capture as much of it as you can. And I have my students ink it because pen is very unforgiving. You really can't blend pen together, and you're limited only to pretty much just contour lines. That way the information is laid bare and there's really not much room for interpretation. Dilute the image. Put it into kind of a comic booky, cartoony style as best as you can, looking at some of the conventions that cartoony comic book styles use. Also, simplify. Throw out the information you don't need and keep what you need. What you keep, you should exaggerate. So, let's look at what we've thrown out. The information for the facial hair, no longer little hatch marks, now it's a big mass. Look at the bridge in the nose. Simplified. We don't need to see all that information. We can just make a curve and it'll read as a nose. Upper eyelid, inner eye socket. All right, a lot of these things are changed just to show a simple circle with some eye anatomy on the bottom. It communicates what makes this scary look scary. The eyes are made bigger to exaggerate it. The mouth is made bigger for exaggeration because the eyes and the mouth are two of the most prominent forms. Got a little bulging vein here. We got some quivery, shivery lines on the outside to suggest pent-up energy, aggression, angst. And we got some little bubbles over here like sweat beads or teardrops floating in space. Like there's a lot of kinetic action happening here in the pose. So we're going from formal to informal with the use of our line, form, and pattern. Now I have students do that a second time, looking only at the middle image now as a reference. Do the exact same thing that you did at first, only referring to the middle one. Get rid of information that you no longer need, heavily emphasize and exaggerate, and stylize. And so here I went kind of more of like a Disney-fication Looney Tunes type style. We don't need to see all the intricacies of the hair. All we need is a basic shape. We could have the eyebrows pop out and hover off of the face. We could have the nose be a simple curve, and so on. What I'd recommend that you do as beginning artist is try not to feel restricted and railroaded in making everything line up. See, this is what I see beginners do often. They think, hey, if I just make sure all the lines are still in the same place and I don't have shading and texture, then it's been simplified, right? Wrong. You need to reinterpret and retranslate this information. All this is an exact trace over what was done here, all right? This is not simplified. It's just been reduced to contours. It's not been reinterpreted. If you want to grow, you want to really stretch yourself outside of your comfort zone, draw what you see and interpret it your way. I hope you guys found this helpful. I look forward to seeing you in class. Bye-bye.